When my son's wife told me I no longer belonged in their home, I smiled instead of crying. I don't know why I smiled. Maybe because my tears had already run dry. Maybe because I didn't want her to see me break. Not in my son's house. My name is Margaret, but most people in town just call me Maggie. 70 years old, born and raised in a quiet town called Willow Creek, where the air still smells like old wood and rain. After my husband, Tom, passed away, I moved in with my son, Daniel, and his wife, Lydia. Daniel was my pride, my only child. We'd always been close, especially after his father died. When Lydia said, "You should stay with us, Mom," I thought it was a blessing. I packed what was left of my life in 2 boxes, one filled with old photographs, another with his father's tools, and I left the house Tom built with his hands. For a while, everything felt warm. Dinner together, morning coffee on the porch. Lydia would sometimes bring me flowers from the garden. I thought, maybe, just maybe, I could belong again. But belonging doesn't last forever. It began quietly, little silences, unfinished sentences, the way Lydia stopped asking if I'd eaten, the way Daniel started working late more often. Then one evening, a simple moment changed everything. I was folding laundry in the living room when Lydia came in. She stood still for a long time, holding her phone, eyes red but voice steady. She said, "Mom, I think it's time we talk about you having your own place." Those words didn't come as a shout. They came like a gentle breeze that somehow tore through my heart. I looked at her, not angry, not surprised, just tired. I wanted to ask why, but I didn't. Instead, I smiled, a weak, trembling smile. Because deep down, I knew. Sometimes love has an expiration date, and sometimes it just changes its shape. That night, as I lay in the small guest room, I heard them whispering in the kitchen. Her voice soft but firm, his quiet, defeated. And I realized my son was torn between 2 homes, one built by his mother's love and one built by the woman he loved now. So I did what any mother would do. I chose silence. But silence has its own way of speaking, and over the next few months, it spoke louder than words. You know, sometimes the hardest part isn't being told to leave. It's realizing you already have. I still remember the mornings in Willow Creek, slow, quiet, wrapped in the smell of fresh coffee and damp earth. My husband, Tom, used to wake before sunrise, whistling an old tune while fixing the porch rail that never seemed to stay straight. He was a simple man, strong hands, gentle eyes, the kind of man who didn't need many words to say he loved you. Daniel took after him in so many ways. He had that same kindness, the kind that made people trust him. When he was a boy, he'd help old Mr. Jacobs down the road carry groceries, or rake leaves for Miss Edith, who always baked him pie in return. That was Daniel, always helping, always giving. When Tom died, a heart attack on a quiet Tuesday morning, Daniel was 25. He held my hand at the hospital and said, "Mom, it's okay. I've got you." And I believed him. Years passed. He moved to the city, got married to Lydia, a bright, career-driven woman who worked in marketing. She had this confidence I admired. She wasn't cold, just different. Modern. They built a lovely home on the edge of town, white porch, big yard, laughter echoing through the halls in those first years. After Tom's passing, the house felt emptier each season. The ticking clock in the kitchen sounded louder, the chair across from me stayed empty, and the quiet became something heavier than peace. Then one day Daniel called. His voice was warm. "Mom, why don't you come stay with us for a while? You shouldn't be alone all the time." I remembered that moment so clearly. It was like someone had opened a window in a stuffy room. Fresh air, hope, love. I said yes before my heart could stop racing. When I arrived, Lydia greeted me with a polite smile. She hugged me a quick one and said, "It's so nice to have you here, Mom." And for a while, I truly believed she meant it. The first few weeks were lovely. We cooked together, shared morning coffee, and sometimes watched those home renovation shows she loved. Daniel looked happy, seeing us together, laughing, building a little routine. I used to bake apple pies every Sunday. It became our small family ritual. Lydia would sit by the counter, scrolling through her phone. Daniel would tell me about his week, and I'd listen. Really listen, because mothers never stop listening. But I also noticed the small things. The way Lydia would sometimes sigh when I rearranged the kitchen shelves, the way she'd quietly redo the laundry I folded, the way she'd close the door when she talked to Daniel about plans for their future. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Every family has its rhythm. Maybe I was just out of tune. Then there were the subtle moments. Easy to miss, but hard to forget. Like the night Daniel brought home takeout instead of eating my cooking. He said, "Lydia had a long day, Mom. Let's just order something." I smiled, but inside, something small cracked. Or when she called me Margaret instead of Mom. It wasn't rude, just distant, like she was reminding herself, and maybe me, that I was a guest. I didn't blame her. Their home, their rules. I just tried to stay helpful, keeping things clean, tending the garden, making sure dinner was ready when they got home. But no matter how much I tried, I could feel the walls shift around me, not physically, but emotionally. The air grew thinner, quieter. The laughter faded. I'd often sit by the window after they went to bed. The house was beautiful, but beauty can be cold sometimes. Outside, the streetlights flickered softly, and I'd whisper to myself, "Don't worry, Maggie, you're just visiting. Don't make it harder for them." But I stayed, and each passing season made it harder to leave. One morning, Lydia came downstairs dressed for work. I smiled and said, "Good morning, sweetheart. Coffee's ready." She hesitated, then said, "Oh, thank you, Margaret," and took it with that polite distance again. When she left, Daniel came to the kitchen. He looked tired. His tie was crooked, his eyes heavy. "Everything okay, Mom?" he asked. I wanted to tell him everything. The way his wife's silence hurt more than her words ever could. The way I felt invisible in a home I helped keep warm. But I couldn't. I just said, "Everything's fine, honey. Just fine." Because mothers carry silence like old photographs. We keep them hidden, but they never really fade. Over the next few months, I watched them grow busier. Work trips, late dinners, less time together. I'd stay up waiting for the sound of their car pulling into the driveway. Some nights it never came. Loneliness is strange. You can feel it even in a crowded house. And the loneliest sound of all is a kitchen clock ticking past midnight. Still, I'd tried to stay grateful. Every Sunday, I'd set the table, hoping for a family meal. Sometimes they came, sometimes they didn't. But I never complained. Because love, for me, was never about being thanked. It was about showing up, even when no one noticed. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Being there, fully, and slowly realizing no one was really seeing me anymore. They say homes are built on love, but sometimes they're held together by one person's quiet endurance, and when that person stops holding on, the silence echoes in every room. The shift didn't happen all at once. It came in small, almost invisible ways, like dust gathering in corners you stop noticing. I started to sense it in Lydia's voice first. That polite tone that had once sounded warm now carried something else. Restraint, maybe. A quiet exhaustion whenever I offered help. One morning, I was in the kitchen, humming softly while preparing Daniel's lunch like I always did. Lydia came down the stairs in a rush, heels clicking against the wood floor. "Oh, Mom, you don't have to do that," she said. Daniel usually grabs something on his way. I smiled. It's all right, sweetheart. I just thought he might like a homemade meal. She hesitated, then forced to smile back. Of course, thank you. But as she turned away, her shoulders slumped, like my kindness had become a weight she didn't ask to carry. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the sandwich I'd made, turkey and cheese, just how Daniel liked it since he was 10. I wrapped it anyway, left it by the door. He didn't take it. It sounds silly, doesn't it? A sandwich shouldn't make someone cry. But it wasn't the sandwich. It was the silence that followed it. That night, Daniel came home late again. I heard the garage door close, his footsteps soft down the hall. I waited for his usual, "Good night, Mom." It never came. I sat on the edge of the bed, the light from the hallway spilling in faintly. Maybe he didn't see my door open. Maybe he was tired. I told myself those things over and over until the words lost their comfort. The next morning, Lydia was in the kitchen with her coffee mug. She looked tired too, but there was something else. Frustration, maybe, or weariness. I poured her another cup and said softly, "Everything all right, dear?" She looked at me for a long second. Then she sighed. "I think we all just need some space, Mom. You've been here almost a year now. Maybe you'd feel better back in Willow Creek, near your friends." Her words were gentle, but they struck deep, like a soft knife, one that cuts without blood but leaves the wound wide open. I swallowed hard. "Oh, I see." She quickly added, "I don't mean it badly. It's just, Daniel and I, we barely get any time together anymore, and I know you must miss your own home." I wanted to tell her I sold that house, the one Tom built with his own hands, that I sold it because Daniel said, "Mom, you'll never need to live alone again." But I didn't. I just nodded, forcing a small smile. "I understand, Lydia. You're right." She looked relieved. That hurt most of all. When Daniel came down a few minutes later, she didn't mention our talk, and I didn't either, because sometimes silence protects the people you love, even if it breaks you in the process. Days turned into weeks. Lydia grew distant, Daniel grew quieter, and I just disappeared into the routine. I woke early, cleaned, cooked, waited. I filled my time with tasks no one asked for, as if staying busy could justify staying at all. Some afternoons, I'd walk down to the small park nearby. There was a bench under a willow tree, my favorite spot. I'd sit there with a thermos of tea, watching young mothers push strollers, kids chasing each other, couples laughing together. Once, a little girl ran up to me and said, "Hi, Grandma." Her mother quickly pulled her back, apologizing. I smiled and said, "It's all right." But as they walked away, I felt tears sting my eyes. I missed being someone's mom, not just in name, but in presence. Daniel used to call me every day when he was younger. Now, even though we lived under the same roof, weeks would pass where we barely spoke beyond polite phrases. "Morning, Mom," "Good night, Mom," nothing in between. I could hear them talking in their room at night, muffled voices, sometimes tense. I never listened on purpose, but in a quiet house, words travel. Once, I heard Lydia say, "She needs her own life, Daniel. We can't keep doing this." And his reply, soft, tired, "I know, but it's my mom." That "but" stayed with me. It echoed in my head like a distant bell, soft, sad, and final. Then came that evening, the one I still remember too clearly. It was raining outside. I was in the living room folding towels, the TV playing softly. Daniel came home first, soaked and tired. "Long day?" I asked gently. "Yeah," he said, loosening his tie. "You don't have to wait up for me, Mom." I smiled. I wasn't, just finishing laundry. A few minutes later, Lydia came in, shutting the door quietly. She didn't say a word to me, just went straight upstairs. Something in my chest tightened. Maybe I should have said something, asked if she was okay, but I didn't want to make her feel trapped. Instead, I made tea. Chamomile, her favorite. I carried it up to their room and knocked softly. The door opened just enough for her face to appear. "Oh," she said, surprised. "I made you some tea," I whispered. She hesitated, then said, "Thanks," and took it carefully. I smiled, a small, hopeful one. "It's all right, dear. I just thought it might help you rest." She nodded, murmured, "Good night, Margaret," and closed the door. I stood there in the hallway for a long time, staring at the door that used to feel like part of my home. Now it was a boundary. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. It sounded like soft whispers, the kind you can almost mistake for someone saying your name. And that's when I made a quiet promise to myself. If they ever asked me to leave, I would. Not with anger, not with blame, just acceptance. Because love, at its purest, sometimes means stepping away, even when your heart begs to stay. A week later, Daniel sat with me at breakfast. He stirred his coffee longer than usual. Finally, he said softly, "Mom, Lydia's been thinking maybe you'd be happier back in Willow Creek." I looked at him carefully. The same eyes that once looked up to me for everything. Now they looked away. "Would you be happier if I left?" I asked quietly. He swallowed hard. "It's not like that. It's just—" "It's okay," I interrupted. "You don't have to explain." He reached across the table, touched my hand. "You've done so much for us. I want you to have your own space." I nodded. Even though every part of me wanted to scream, I already had space. It was called your home. But instead, I said softly, "Of course, honey. You're right." He looked relieved. That relief, again, broke something inside me. I finished my coffee, stood up, and began clearing the table. The plates clinked against the sink, the sound filling the silence between us. As I washed the dishes, I realized something. Sometimes love doesn't fade because of anger or betrayal. Sometimes it just slowly erodes, like water smoothing out stone until there's nothing left but memory. That night, I began folding my things quietly. 2 boxes, the same 2 I arrived with. One with photographs, one with Tom's tools. It felt like déjà vu, only this time there was no hope mixed in, just a calm ache, like the echo of something once beautiful. The next morning, before they woke up, I left a note on the kitchen table. It said, "Thank you for letting me stay. You both have a beautiful life ahead. Don't worry about me. I'll be just fine. Love always, Mom." I didn't want to see their faces when they read it. I didn't want them to feel guilty. I just wanted them to live peacefully, even if peace meant without me. I closed the door behind me and stepped out into the cold morning air. The sky was pale, the sun barely rising, and for a moment I stood there, breathing it all in. Freedom doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels like standing in the rain without an umbrella, letting it soak you completely, because at least it's honest. And as I walked down that quiet street with my 2 boxes, I realized I had no idea where I was going, but I was finally leaving. The first night after leaving my son's house felt heavier than any storm I'd ever known. I sat by the window in my small rented room, the sound of the rain against the glass, mixing with the hum of passing cars. Everything felt strange. Unfamiliar walls, an empty chair, no soft hum of family voices from the other room. For the first time in years, I was truly alone. I had a cup of tea in my hands, though it had already turned cold. The lamp beside me flickered faintly, casting long shadows on the pale walls. I thought about Michael, my son, and how quiet he'd been when I left. No hug, no words, only that look, like he was torn between 2 worlds, afraid to disappoint either his wife or his mother. I whispered to myself, "You did the right thing, Helen." But even as I said it, my heart disagreed. The days began to blend together. Morning started with silence, coffee, and the faint sound of the old neighbor's radio playing country music. I found small things to do, watering the little plant by the window, folding clothes I had already folded twice, writing letters I never sent. Every letter began the same: "Dear Michael, I hope you're eating well. I miss you." And every letter ended the same: "Love, Mom." But I couldn't bring myself to mail even one of them. A week later, I went to the grocery store. The cashier smiled and said, "Good morning, ma'am. How are you today?" I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. I wasn't sure anymore how to answer that question. I walked home slowly through the drizzle, clutching the small brown paper bag, milk, bread, and a small packet of his favorite cookies. Old habits die hard, don't they? I had picked them up without thinking. That evening, I sat at the table and placed 2 cookies on a plate. One for me, one for the son who wasn't there. One afternoon, there was a knock at my door. It startled me. I rarely had visitors. When I opened it, I saw Mrs. Turner, my old neighbor from the house across the street where I used to live with Michael. "Helen," she said gently, "I saw your old house. They've repainted it blue. Looks different." I smiled faintly. Blue, that was his wife's favorite color. She hesitated before asking, "Have you heard from him?" I shook my head. "Not yet. Maybe he's busy." But deep down, I knew. He wasn't too busy. He was just trying to balance peace in his new life. Mrs. Turner reached out and squeezed my hand. "You raised him right, Helen. Sometimes the world confuses good men. They find their way back. Just give him time." Her words stayed with me long after she left. That night, I pulled out the old photo albums. There he was, Michael with his messy hair and missing front tooth, holding a popsicle in one hand and his first school trophy in the other. Page after page, I relived every moment. His first day of college, his wedding day, the last Christmas we spent together. Then I reached the final photo, the one from last Thanksgiving. He was smiling, but I could see it now. The distance had already begun. He sat next to his wife, his arm around her, while I stood slightly to the side, not forgotten, but slowly fading from the frame of his new life. The weeks turned into months, the seasons changed, the leaves fell, the air turned crisp, and soon Christmas lights began appearing in windows again. I baked cookies like I always did. The smell filled the room: cinnamon, vanilla, and nostalgia. I wrapped a small tin of them and wrote a note: "For Michael and Anna, Merry Christmas. With love, Mom." I mailed it that evening, and on Christmas morning, I sat by the window, watching snowflakes fall gently on the street, waiting. The phone stayed silent. But the world has its quiet miracles. Sometimes they don't arrive in a phone call. They arrive as letters. In late January, I received a small envelope. It had Michael's handwriting. I held it for a long time before opening it. Inside, just a short message. "Hi, Mom. I got your cookies. Thank you. Hope you're okay. Michael." That was all. No love, Michael, no invitation to visit, just simple words. But I smiled anyway. It was something, a crack of light in the wall of silence. As the years passed, I learned to live with quiet. I joined the church choir. I volunteered at the local library, reading to children on Saturdays. I made new friends. I found little pockets of joy in places I had never noticed before. The laughter of the kids, the warmth of sunlight through the window, the smell of fresh rain on old earth. And yet, every evening, I'd sit by that same window, just like I used to, and whisper a prayer for my son. "Keep him safe, Lord, and let him remember me kindly." Then one rainy afternoon, 7 years after I had left his home, the phone rang. For a moment, I froze. The sound was so unfamiliar, so unexpected, that I almost didn't answer. When I did, the line was quiet for a few seconds. Then a trembling voice said, "Mom?" I knew that voice. "Michael?" I whispered. He took a shaky breath. "Mom? I remember now." Tears filled my eyes before I could speak. "What do you remember, honey?" "I remember everything," he said softly. "The smell of your cookies, the way you used to wait by the window. I didn't see it then, but I do now."
For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words I'd prayed to hear for years, they had finally found me. He continued. "Anna left, Mom. She said she wasn't ready for this life, and now I'm standing in that same kitchen, looking at your old chair, and I miss you. I pressed the phone to my chest, trembling. I'm here, sweetheart. I never stopped being here. He began to cry, not the kind of cry that needs comforting, the kind that releases everything you've held for too long. I'm so sorry, he said. And I whispered, I know, and I forgive you. That evening he came to visit. When I opened the door, I saw my boy again, not the man lost in confusion, but the son I had raised. He hugged me for a long, quiet minute. Neither of us said anything. The rain outside softened to a drizzle, and for the first time in years, my home felt full again. As we sat at the table, sipping tea, I looked at him and said, You know, Michael, when your wife told me I no longer belonged there, I thought maybe she was right. But now I realize a mother never stops belonging. Not in a house, not in a family, but in her child's heart. He smiled, his eyes glistening. You always belonged, Mom. I just forgot for a while. That night, when he left, he turned at the door and said, I'll call tomorrow, Mom. And for once, I believed him. After he left, I stood by the window again, the same one where I had waited all those years, the same silence, but now it felt different. Not empty, just peaceful. I whispered to the rain outside, Thank you for bringing him back. Sometimes love doesn't leave. It just waits, quietly, patiently, until we're ready to see it again. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the pain, it's about choosing peace over pride. And for a mother's heart, belonging is not a place. It's a bond that time can bend but never break.
The weeks after Michael's visit felt softer, like the world had finally remembered how to breathe. Each morning, sunlight spilled through my curtains in a way I hadn't noticed in years. It was as if the universe had been waiting for that one moment, that one phone call, to remind me that love, even when silent, never disappears. Michael called often now, sometimes every evening, sometimes just to say, Hi, Mom, how was your day? And every time I heard his voice, my heart felt a little lighter. We didn't talk about the years we lost. We didn't need to. Love, when it's real, doesn't demand explanations. It simply forgives. One afternoon, he came by with his little daughter, my granddaughter, Lily. She was 6, with big, curious eyes, and a giggle that could melt the coldest winter. Grandma Helen, she said, running into my arms, Daddy says you make the best cookies ever. I laughed, holding her close. Well, then Daddy remembers something right. We baked together that day, flour on the counter, laughter in the air, a kind of warmth that felt like the home I'd once lost. Michael watched from the doorway, smiling, and in that moment, I realized this was what forgiveness looks like. Not words, not apologies, just presence. Later that evening, when Lily had gone to bed, Michael and I sat on the porch. The air smelled of rain and pine, and crickets sang somewhere in the dark. He looked at me quietly before saying, Mom, I used to think growing up meant cutting ties, making your own life. But I was wrong. It's not about leaving, it's about carrying the people who shaped you. I reached over and took his hand. And sometimes, I said softly, it takes losing something to learn how much it mattered. He nodded, eyes glistening. I'm sorry it took me this long. You came back, I whispered. That's what matters. Months passed like that, gently. I'd spend weekends with them, telling Lily bedtime stories and teaching her how to sew little buttons on her doll's dress. Every now and then she'd ask, Grandma, were you always here? And I'd smile and say, in my heart, yes, I was always here. Sometimes, when she'd fall asleep on my lap, I'd look at her tiny face and think about all the years I'd spent waiting by that window, the prayers, the letters, the silence. And I realized every tear, every lonely night had led to this moment. One summer evening, we had dinner together, me, Michael, and Lily. The table was simple, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and the cookies that had started it all. Lily reached for one and said, Grandma, Daddy says these cookies mean love. I smiled. He's right, sweetheart. They do. Michael looked at me, eyes soft. You know, Mom, I still remember the smell of these cookies when I came home from school. I didn't realize then that it was your way of saying I love you every single day. Tears welled up in my eyes. That's all a mother ever tries to say, son. After dinner, I stepped outside and looked up at the night sky. The stars seemed brighter somehow, or maybe after years of sadness, I was finally able to see them again. The sound of laughter drifted from the house, Michael helping Lily with the dishes, both of them laughing about the foam bubbles, and I thought to myself, maybe life doesn't always go the way we dream, but it always gives us a second chance, if we're willing to wait with love instead of bitterness. As the years went on, my hair grew whiter, my hands a little slower, but my heart, it was lighter than it had ever been. I spent my mornings reading, my afternoons in the garden, and my evenings surrounded by the kind of peace I once begged the world for. Michael would visit often. Sometimes he'd bring Lily, now a teenager, taller than me and full of that same spark her father once had. And every time they left, I'd wave from the porch, just like old times. But now, it wasn't waiting. It was gratitude. One winter, I got a little sick. Nothing serious, just age reminding me that time was passing. Michael insisted I stay with them for a while. At first, I hesitated. After all, that house had once been the place where I was told I didn't belong. But when I stepped through the door, everything was different. The walls were still blue, Anna's favorite color, but now they were covered with family photos. And in the center of the living room, framed beautifully, was a picture of me holding baby Michael from years ago. He smiled. You belong here, Mom. You always did. I couldn't speak. I just hugged him. Those months with them were some of the happiest of my life. Lily would sit by my bedside, telling me stories about school. Michael would make me tea the way I used to make it for him, with just a hint of honey. The house that had once felt like a wound now felt like home again. And sometimes, late at night, I'd wake to hear them talking softly in the next room, laughing, sharing, remembering. It was the sound of healing. One evening, I sat with Lily on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and pink. Grandma, she asked, were you ever sad? I smiled gently. Yes, sweetheart, for a long time. What made you happy again? She said, swinging her feet. I looked at her and said, time, forgiveness, and the love that never really went away. She thought about it for a moment, then leaned her head on my shoulder. I'll remember that, she whispered. And in that moment, I knew the story of love, patience, and forgiveness wouldn't end with me. It would live on through her. Years later, as age finally began to slow me down, I started keeping a small notebook. In it, I wrote letters. Not the kind I'd written before, full of sadness, but letters of gratitude. To Michael, to Lily, to the world that had hurt me and healed me too. One letter read, Dear Life, thank you for teaching me that love is measured not by how often we're remembered, but by how deeply we continue to care, even in silence. When I passed that notebook to Michael one evening, he read the first page and began to cry. He looked up and said, Mom, I'll make sure Lily reads every word someday. I smiled. Do that, son, because someday she'll need to remember that forgiveness is the purest form of love. The final time I sat by the window, the same window where I once waited for years, I didn't wait anymore. I simply watched the world with peace. Children playing in the street, the hum of cars, the golden light of dusk, all of it felt like a quiet farewell from the universe. I whispered softly to myself, I belong everywhere love remembers me. When you lose your place in someone's life, it doesn't mean your love disappears. It means your story is still being written, just on another page. Forgiveness isn't a gift to those who hurt you. It's a door you open so your heart can breathe again. Sometimes the family we think we've lost comes back. Not the same, but wiser, softer, more human. And when they do, we realize something powerful. Love doesn't fade. It waits. So if you're listening tonight and there's someone you miss, someone you're waiting for, don't lose hope, because love always finds its way home.